Batman vs. Superman: Dawn of Justice. You probably know this movie is very divisive. In fact, every DC Universe film, starting with Man of Steel, has had intense, divided reactions, as well as mixed to negative critical response. With critics and fans alike, things have gotten more heated and more divisive, especially online with each film that releases. This video isn't built to tell you whether to like or dislike Batman v Superman, or even whether to see it. My goal is to give you something valuable to think about concerning the film and events in the film community at large, in a way you may not have thought of before, regardless of how entertaining you thought the movie was initially. Also note, this video concerns the ultimate cut of the film, and many of the scenes I'd like to highlight may not be present in the original release. So I'll cut to the big idea and then focus in. This movie is not focused primarily on Superman or Batman, but rather how they are perceived by each other, the media, and the world around them. Batman hates Superman before they've ever really even met, despite not knowing him on a personal level or attempting to gain an understanding of him as a human individual with a past, emotions, and values that shape his actions. Superman, similarly, is quick to judge the Bat vigilante without knowing all of the facts or considering the rationale and history of the man behind the mask. There is evidence that influences their perspectives throughout the film to give them proper motivation, but some of their hateful conclusions are hypocritical and unfounded. This is intentional. The personas of both men are masks. They only see each other from the outside as Superman and Batman, and not as Clark and Bruce, the relatably damaged men who share similar orphan pasts but ended up like opposite sides of the same coin. The character development in the film really happens when they are Clark and Bruce, not when they are superheroes, because as heroes, they are solely viewed and judged from the public viewpoint, the public perception. As Zack Snyder himself said, the third main character in the film is the media. This is where the theme of perception gets very interesting. The media's view on superheroes has always been an interesting concept that is manifested wonderfully in characters like J. Jonah Jameson labeling Spider-Man a menace, Lois Lane in Superman, even Iris West in The Flash. But this movie takes it a step further in a very intentional way. Not only are there news clips throughout the entirety of the film, and Clark's arc touches on the theme of integrity within the press and media, many scenes touch on how everyone views the caped figures based on the information and debates they hear from the media they are shown watching, or secondhand from other people, Bruce and Clark included. In fact, the idea of the public figure versus the private individual is very clear, considering most every scene in the entire movie, until the final battle sequences that feature a superhero in costume, all take place from a citizen perspective. It's less about truth and more about what people believe and why they believe it based on what they see and what they have previously experienced, which all leads to the judgments they make. And all of this makes the ending that much more satisfying when certain ultimate truths are revealed. With that in mind, let's go in depth and I'll show you. The opening moments of the film, like the ending moments, depict a funeral procession where caskets are being carried toward a burial site. Bruce runs away emotionally distraught, which is intercut with scenes of his parents' murder. This gorgeous opener with stylish text, editing, and visuals, along with a haunting musical score, is not just a tired rehash of the Batman origin story, but actually a prologue integral to the themes of the story. Bruce's motivations throughout the course of the movie are driven by these moments, as they defined his childhood and his life philosophies. This tragedy is shown parallel to his literal and figurative descent into darkness, and the creation of the Batman as young Bruce falls to the ground mirroring his mother's pearls. Plus, it's cool that this scene emulates frames straight out of the beginning of Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns, of which the film shares other themes and plot elements. Batman's voiceover refers to how the world is full of grays and not absolutes, because the world is flawed, and man is flawed. And at a young age, Bruce is brutally exposed to this, not only making him Batman, but shaping his view of the world and his view of people, who he constantly judges and redefines based on that experience, which we will come back to later. He then ascends into light basically by embracing darkness, an irony he refers to as the beautiful lie. The next sequence is a scene from Man of Steel, reworked to be from the perspective of Bruce Wayne and the other citizens. The arrival of the Superman, specifically adding the word "the" to emphasize the public view of Superman, which is impersonal and distant. He is unknown and an alien, objectified from the outside, and not thought of like a normal individual. In Man of Steel, we see Superman struggle to save the Earth and defeat evil against near impossible odds from his noble perspective, but the collateral damage many commented on in that film is what is center screen here. Seeing men paralyzed and kids navigating through the rubble, many left orphaned, is simple and effective in showing the personal tragedy of the everyman that is often overlooked in huge-budget disaster action films. Even what to Superman is heroism and saving mankind from complete annihilation is from the BVS perspective a larger-than 9/11 catastrophe, as buildings crumble, families are torn apart, and city blocks are reduced to rubble due to the battle of two superpowered gods that was brought to mankind's door. They don't know Superman or his intentions. Their perspective is that of hurt people experiencing massive loss and devastation, and when such awful loss is experienced, the people look for a cause or a person to pin blame and seek vengeance. And as Bruce heroically saves a now orphaned girl and sees the red-caped hero crashing through buildings, to him, the culprit seems clear. Let's discuss the Africa sequence, one of the more important scenes in the film, as well as one of the most butchered in the theatrical release. We see Lois Lane being a self-capable and effective reporter, confident in a harsh environment, and the perspective is firmly through her eyes. The idea of perception is once again brought up, this time in the context of American politics. The US is neutral on the outside in the African Civil War, but as the general says, the view of where America truly stands may be different to some than what they claimed, and their actions could be drastically different than what the world has been told. The general goes on to give a sentiment mirrored later by Lex Luthor, that power cannot be innocent. Lex's men execute a massacre and burn the bodies to frame Superman, and point of view switches to the military following their agent's demise, and they see Superman once again from an outside perspective destroy their drone as he goes to save Lois, a circumstance that doesn't cast him in a good light, though we know in his mind he is simply rushing to protect the woman he loves. After he saves Lois, the CIA finds the village distraught and mourning over their loss, and Superman yet again seems to be the cause, with no evidence to prove otherwise at the time. Next is our first look at the trial, a recurring setting in the film as people discuss the events of Africa. The senator's remarks address the issue of the responsibility that comes with power, in turn bringing up the fear that comes when people have great power outside of our control, a fear that perpetrates the trials and the characters of the film throughout. The introduction of Batman to the audience involves two cops who find terrified children being rescued by Batman, yet they are as scared of the hero as they are the criminal, a dark notion to think about. They see Batman torture a man and epically climb the ceiling into the shadows, which seems almost larger than life, and inhuman the way he moves, which really goes to show the perspective people have of him, as we are seeing this through terrified eyes that could be exaggerating things. He strikes fear into the hearts of not only criminals, but at this point everyone, and his own symbol is a death warrant. For the first time in the film, we see Superman out of the suit, as Clark, and for the first time we get a window into his true self, his personal life, and his values, through the eyes of those he loves. In this case, Lois Lane. These types of moments are the few not dictated from the perspective of the media or citizens, because this is his private life. Much like our window into celebrities' lives or through the media and magazines and the public face in interviews, but their true character and private lives remain hidden away, seen only by those they are closest to and love. The same is true for the heroes of this world. However, we see both sides, the real Clark and the Superman everyone else sees. He loves Lois deeply and acted solely in her consideration in Africa, a human thing to do. But Lois reminds him that actions have consequences, even for the right reasons. A lesson already connected to Superman's character from the prologue destruction. Lois worries about the public obligation of Superman affecting their private bond, but Clark is very real and very intimate with her, something we haven't gotten to see as much of in past film iterations. This is juxtaposed with a similar sequence but concerning Bruce Wayne's personal realities, in his case through the eyes of who he loves, Alfred. Alfred knows the darkness that has overtaken Bruce and has taken care of him as a friend and a mentor figure his whole life. He looks on the darker, violent actions of Batman with disdain, like some of the audience surely did as he condemns people to their deaths. Bruce continues to act as a detective, trying to stop crime by any means necessary, acknowledging himself as a criminal, a true vigilante. But Alfred knows things have changed, and his friend is in denial that he is at his lowest peak, his darkest hour, and traces it back to the appearance of Superman. Like the trial, Alfred addresses the powerlessness against beings of great power, and the fear of such power that drives people to go against their character, as well as the rage against injustice that has festered within Bruce to where his own pursuit of justice is on a path more akin to the criminals he fights. He takes lives in the name of saving them, and is blinded by rage in a way he can't see the hypocrisy and the changes happening within him. Alfred knows if he continues that he could lose the good man Bruce was to the rage that consumes him and leads him to unwavering cruelty. Lex is introduced, and while Eisenberg's performance is liked or disliked based on personal preference, he is at the very least undeniably different from the older scheming businessmen of the past portrayals. This Lex is characterized by inferiority based on his defining childhood moments. Batman's parents' death led him on his path, and similarly Lex's parentage sends him on his. He almost immediately brings up the subject of his father, indicating to the audience that the Lex stereotype we know from the comics was embodied in Lex Sr., who is now deceased, leaving a character with similar elements, but very different motivations, and a different twist on the expected villain of Lex Luthor. Thematically, the subject of his father is vital to his arc, and Batman, Superman, and Lex all have important thematic connections to their parentage, referenced constantly. At this point, he seems to have a great respect for his father, who left him the company he now runs. He wants an import license for kryptonite because he has finally found a means that empowers man with control against the powers they used to fear or have faith in. This deals with the issues of trust and security, since the silver bullet would give Lex power that should be feared as much as the Superman threat. However, the fear of the unknown and what we are powerless against could sway people as they feel vulnerable. Clark then is shown watching the news. This is the first instance of this in the film, but it happens frequently following this, which I will point out as it comes. Whether the woman is telling the truth or not, Clark, like anyone else, is watching, and is affected emotionally by what he sees and how people think of him and respond to his actions. The man who lost his legs in the Metropolis fight has an obsessive hate for Superman due to his accident, though he too has never actually interacted with him beyond the indirect interaction from his injury. He has all of his Superman information, positive and negative, from newspapers, which he has strung across his wall, and blames him for the loss of his livelihood. He paints false God across Superman's monument, which is broadcasted on the news, and once again Clark witnesses, as well as working in the media himself. The Daily Planet wishes to write articles questioning the public's relationship with Superman and the possible change of heart in the public perception of him towards a negative light due to the actions and words of others. Clark is hurt and questions himself due to all of this response. Clark goes to Gotham, to the home of the witness in his trial, looking for answers personally, but she is nowhere to be found. He hears for the first time about the Batman, this symbol of fear who is changed to a new level of violence and darkness noticed by the citizens. One must consider, however, Clark doesn't know that this Batman has been fighting crime for 20 years, putting away many villains and keeping the streets much safer than a Gotham City without a protector. Superman finds Batman in his darkest moment and makes his judgment solely based on the fear he instills in others and the response of the outside world, just like Batman does through the media towards Superman. In this world of media negativity, Lois and Clark both seek to publish what they believe to be true and meaningful, what people need to see, not what will get the best ratings. Clark is oddly requested to go to the same venue as Bruce Wayne, hosted by Lex Luthor. Conspicuous? Yes. In a key scene, the senator talks to Lex, who once again goes on about his father, who left him orphaned. His father's sayings and mannerisms, and the very room they are in is identical to how it was left. This all leads toward the idea that Lex, even after his father's death, is futilely seeking to gain approval from his father, approval he was never able to gain. In addition, the stories of Lex in order to gain sympathy mirror the way Lex Sr. used him for financial gain to get money from donors, indicating how he imitates his father's behavior. This scene is honestly wonderfully haunting. The way he repetitively taps the table is unnerving and builds tension, and every line he says mirrors the core themes addressed so far. Power cannot be innocent. Powerlessness is a catalyst of fear. And the senator's response simply states the theme of perception, most important to the story as a whole. Take urine and call it peach tea. Take two differing extremes that can look similar to the outside, but you have to personally approach it to discover the truth. No matter what you call something or how you perceive it, there is another way to view it, true or not, like whether something is a protective measure or a weapon of mass destruction. Both are possible viewpoints depending on the perspective of the individual viewing it, much like the varying viewpoints on our core heroes. We are again reminded of how Bruce's parents' murder continues to haunt him and shape his daily thoughts, as no measure of escape has been able to take it away. We get a hint at the death of Jason Todd's Robin in an Easter egg moment, which is another very important defining past moment, which has created the Bruce and Batman ideology we see in this film and his darker worldview. At Lex's party, he gives an awkward but interesting speech that could suggest some foreshadowing concerning Lex's plot. He describes himself as a philanthropist being someone who loves humanity. He discusses the divide of gods and men in mythology on opposite sides of a sort of conflict. In this world, some are heralding Superman as a god against humanity, and Lex would identify as Prometheus, the one empowering humanity with their silver bullet. Like Prometheus's fire, it would give the powerless humanity a power that would threaten the gods, in this case, Kryptonians. As Bruce walks down the stairs, the topic yet again drifts toward Lex's father and how he was a self-made man coming from nothing in his youth, which is a desirable quality in the American ideals, which would make Lex popular with his audience. He then gets flustered as he grapples with his feelings of inferiority. He is full of knowledge, which is power, yet he feels utterly powerless, a paradox he seeks to remedy by taking power. These feelings of inadequacy stemming from his childhood drive his motives as the primary villain. Finally, Bruce and Clark come face to face, though their understanding of one another does not come till the end. Bruce tries to be condescending, but Clark is genuine and honest and drives home his question and his beliefs concerning Batman, causing people to live in fear against their rights. Bruce retorts with a line that fits perfectly with our discussion of opinions shaped by the media. "Don't believe everything you hear, son." Clark says no, that he's seen it firsthand. But has he? He doesn't know the 20 years of Batman history in the city, and he hasn't seen the Bat in action. He has the word of the media and a couple second-hand accounts, and that is the extent of it. He objects to Batman on principles that make sense, but he judges and jumps to conclusions, thinking he is more educated on the subject than he actually is. Praising Superman and condemning Batman is pointed out by Bruce to be hypocrisy, when in fact both of them are being hypocritical. The difference is that both men believe they are doing the right thing, and that they are correct. As audience members, we can agree more so with one than the other concerning their opinions and actions, but we also have a more complete picture, as both men form their opinions somewhat prematurely. Clark mentions the world's opinion once again, addressing the citizen perspective on Superman that battles back and forth throughout the film, and Bruce finishes the conversation with a note on the darkness in Gotham that truly has corrupted his view, though the statement is part of a sarcastic burn. Luthor injects some humor and says what the audience is thinking. "Wow, they're actually talking to each other! Finally!" Superman sees people in need and rushes to their aid without hesitation. The people look up to him as a sort of savior, triggering a montage of news and media feeds discussing Superman, whether he is good or not, and the implications of him on the world, all from various perspectives and opinions. However, as they talk and debate, Superman takes action and continues to save people. He acts as a symbol of hope to people who have lost all hope, a fitting role for someone bearing the symbol of L, which in itself stands for hope. The shot following this barrage of media information is one of Clark. Once again, Clark is taking in the news, and all of the words against and for him the world is spreading, and it greatly troubles him as he tries to do the right thing. Conflicted, he seeks out his mother for guidance. Like Batman, he sees that the world is complicated. There is gray area, and the right decision isn't always easy to see. He tries to do the right thing, yet some scorn him for it, his every action judged by the general population. His struggle in this is very human, despite whatever abilities he has within him. Following this, Clark continues his research on the Bat through various online news outlets. Our next thematic moment sees Clark debating with Perry about the true role of the media in the world, exposing justice and standing against the social issues of the day, or entertainment and ratings. And Perry references the date 1938, the year release of the first Superman comic. Our next news segment shows that this world also has jokes made about Superman and satires of him written by talk show hosts, as it would be with a celebrity in the real world. This makes the world seem more fleshed out, like the Gotham Metropolis football game earlier on, by showing various details related to the universe and characters, but beyond the core of the story or future films. Not to sound like a broken record, but even the encased sword can be viewed as relating to perception, as it means something to Diana, who knows it's a fake, and Bruce, who knows it's a fake, but everyone else sees it as genuine, differing perspectives based on knowledge and past experience. The Bat-branded prisoner who got shivved to death is photographed and sent to Clark by Lex to provoke him and give evidence to fuel his view on Batman. The handwriting in this picture is identical to handwriting used later on to provoke Bruce. Next, we have a great scene. Bruce lies to the man closest to him, and without pause plans to steal a weapon of mass destruction, thinking his ends justify his means. Alfred, as always, sees what Bruce cannot. Alfred knows Superman isn't the threat, but the darkness in Bruce is corrupting him to see the world in this way and take these actions. Bruce's impassioned defense is in the same line of thought as Lex's own defense. We cannot afford to be powerless. faith and trust aren't options through their bitter perspectives, and Bruce goes even further, saying the possibility of a threat alone is deserving of neutralization without hesitation. He has seen good men fall, and he himself is falling. He believes that evil will befall them all after 20 years futilely fighting Gotham crime, and Superman, good or not, is too dangerous to leave unchecked for the future. To the enraged Bruce, still bitter at the loss of Metropolis, firmly believes he has to die. Clark looks once again for answers and sees another citizen perspective. The Bat-branded man from earlier was the father of this woman's child, and he has been murdered because of Batman. This scene indicates to the audience that his murder was due to his prison transfer, most likely orchestrated by Luthor. To Clark, it's haunting news as he seeks to help justice in the world as a reporter, but is told that a fist, violence, a full confrontation as Superman against Batman is the only way to end the pain he desperately wants to remedy. For the viewer, this also grounds Batman as a killer, giving Superman more motive and reinforcing how far Bruce has fallen. Superman encounters Batman, stopping him from stealing the kryptonite and giving him a warning to end the Batman, so he won't have to face him physically in a confrontation he doesn't want to have, as he doesn't want to hurt him but has a strong moral objection to Batman's practices and is willing to fight if necessary. Batman, of course, bites back. Do you bleed? You will. This scene is the only one so far from a hero perspective, as it features Batman in some action sequences and the conflict directly between Superman and Batman. At this point, they solely see the outside judgments they previously held, but now can state them to each other face to face. Lois, who has been pursuing leads on the mysterious bullet from the Africa sequence, depends on an old friend to get her information to help properly give closure to what happened in the tragedy that haunts her. In asking him, she depends on his beliefs on Superman. If you believe he is innocent, then look, the choice is yours. On the news, watched by Clark, the senator touches on the relative nature of good and bad in major decisions and urges Superman to come in person. She interestingly states the world needs to know what happened in that desert. The world is watching, and the world is determined to know the truth. Truth they will be told by the hearings they watch on their televisions. But does the world really need to know? And will they really find the truth in what they watch? Food for thought. Martha gives her son advice that rings very true and gives a personal spin on previous concepts. People fearing powerlessness goes hand in hand with people fearing what they don't understand, even if what they don't understand is actually good, something not worth fearing. It's the vulnerability that drives fearing people to make rash decisions and discriminate. But people know the truth based on the actions you make and the person you are and present yourself to be. In Clark's case, the whole world is watching. And though he is torn to pieces by the media, he is shown saving people and pursuing justice where he believes there is injustice. The words of a harsh world are making him doubt even as his actions are with pure intent. So what should he do? He is a symbol of hope. Hope for the hopeless and justice in a world of injustice. Regardless of what people say, he can be what the world needs and protect them and show them truth and justice, and he doesn't have to. He doesn't owe it to them. He sacrifices his livelihood to give everything to the people of Earth. As he gives everything, the people are retaliating against him, a common phenomenon in our current volatile social media environment. And like anyone would, Clark doubts his investment. His arc moving forward concerns his answers to these questions, ultimately leading him not only sacrificing his livelihood, but his life. Meanwhile, the pieces are falling together. Lois discovers Lex framed Superman in Africa, and the main witness we have seen from the trial admits she is a fraud, also threatened and paid by Lex. Not only that, but Lex knows who the Caped Heroes are, something shown as he mysteriously united them at the party earlier on. News people are on the scene at the trial, and for once Batman is the one shown watching. Bruce's human compassion toward his crippled friend has been rejected in the form of regular payments that never reached their intended purpose. This is revealed through handwriting exactly like Clark's photos. Lex's handwriting. The grand orchestration of his plot is nearing completion. The psychological damage seemingly inflicted by the Metropolis incident on the man he sought to help would further drive Bruce to rage. Superman arrives at the Capitol and the world watches. Martha witnesses the event on the diner televisions. Lex finally says the main thematic line. You want to know the oldest lie in America? That power can be innocent. Lex ties up loose ends and has the witness killed. The protesters and fans of Superman are all in one loud mob outside the trial, and the sight of Superman leads to more screaming and yelling. Lois stands helpless in the middle, one of the few who actually know what he is going through and doesn't view him as politics, but as a person and a friend. When Superman enters, the room goes silent. The subject of debate has become personal. They have bickered for some time over whether he is a threat or a friend or a foe, but now he stands before them, and they are surprised. As the world watches, the building explodes. Superman's grimace in this sequence really matches the tragedy and shock of what just occurred. Everything crumbles around him, and he could do nothing. Bruce sees and is reminded of the fatal moment in his upbringing where he too was powerless. More loss, more devastation, more feelings of powerlessness. All of these things can lead to clouded emotional judgments and uncharacteristic cruelty, as it does for Bruce. Superman isn't really responsible, but he's a target, center screen on every television in the world against the backdrop of 3 major disasters. His innocence is the truth, but the truth is irrelevant to the angered populace who see a powerful man and enraging loss live on their screens. It's all perception. Enough coincidences around a large enough group of people and the world, most of which not actually present, will start to form a majority opinion based on the leanings of what things appear to be. Lex's plan is working. People are beginning to see Superman differently. Clark does what he can to help, but people's response to him has changed. The trauma of it all is too much, and he flies away. Batman 2 has reached his breaking point. He brutally wrecks LexCorp and steals the kryptonite to fight Superman. Later that night, news of the bombing is still coming in, and Clark goes to the one he loves for solace. He doubts himself and his purpose. He says Superman was never real. Lex has twisted the world's view, which has affected Clark's own in response. Lois reminds him of a different perspective, a different point of view, a different perception. Superman is real, because Superman is whatever people see. As a person, he is Clark, but the symbol of Superman as a figure is defined by the public, and Superman is hope, a light in a dark world, something to aspire to be. The assurances of the existence of ideals and goodness that are sometimes hard to see in a fallen world full of gray, like Bruce says in the opening. Superman is important. His symbol means something to people. And his message of hope is, as Lois says, all some people have. He doubts whether the symbol that meant so much on the lost Krypton has any value in the dark, antagonizing world he has adopted as his own that has seemingly rejected him. The loudest voice seems to speak for everyone, and despite those who desperately look up to him for aid and are forever grateful, the media and the angry mob have spoken, and it's all Clark can see. The reintroduction of the soft Man of Steel piano theme here makes this moment even more heartbreaking. Newspaper and news outlets the next day are still debating whether Superman had any involvement or knowledge of the bombing, and the world is watching. Into the night, FBI intel and tons of other accounts are flooding to news agencies and still being broadcasted. Meanwhile, Lois is putting together the pieces as she has throughout the film. The bomber didn't plan on dying that day. Lex is responsible for the bullet in Africa, and the metal in the wheelchair, which is lead, which is specifically designed against Superman's abilities of X-ray vision. All of the tragedies around Superman were orchestrated, and Lex is the man behind the curtain. Clark goes to the mountains to sort things out and sees a vision of his father from Earth. He tells an allegorical story that reflects Superman's situation. He tried to do good, but in saving one thing, something else was destroyed, and it haunts him. The remedy was the symbol of hope and good in the world that came into his life. The reminder that Superman himself can be for the world. He found this in Martha, the love of his life, his world. As Clark misses his father, Bruce also has a moment at the grave of his father. He has aged farther than his father ever had a chance to, and wants to do something that matters. He's fought criminals for 20 years, but is bitter, and the endless cycle of crime has worn him thin. He wants a legacy. He wants to take out the rage he's held for so long and conquer the Superman, and he's too blinded by darkness to see the truth. He plans to be like the first generation of Waynes, hunters. He plans to kill. In the words of Alfred, so falls the house of Wayne. In the diner Martha works at, the news is talking about the whereabouts of Superman and why he hasn't come forward, not once considering the emotional ramifications or personal life the figure may have in a natural response to such horrors. It's not personal to them, it's a matter of debate, like politics, but as always, it's on the TV, in the open, and the citizens are always shown watching. Batman unveils his kryptonite spear. Not only is this a weapon to fight Kryptonians, it's also a part of the religious symbolism surrounding Superman. The movie constantly refers to the distinction between gods and men, and questions the humanity or divinity of Superman, and his origin mirrors the story of Moses, but this particular weapon goes along with the Jesus imagery in the film, of which there is more in this final section. A spear was driven into Jesus at the crucifixion, therefore symbolically a spear is the weapon used to, quote, kill gods. After an encounter very characteristic of this version of Lex, Lois is pushed off of a building to usher in the appearance of Superman, who of course rescues her. Lex is still in control. He knows Superman's identity, what Lois knows and Lois's relationship with Superman, Bruce's identity, and most importantly for the next sequence, he knows Clark's mother and has taken her captive. Lex, in a telling conversation with Superman, brings up the major themes once again and finally explains his motivations. He starts by mirroring the first lines in the film from Bruce's voiceover concerning moral absolutes and the fallen state of man. Lex isn't a businessman bent on world domination for personal gain like past iterations, but rather a psychotic genius tormented by a complex of inferiority and childhood neglect, which he compensates by trying to disprove, quote, God, referring to Superman. When he mocks Lois for using a 3-syllable word, he places his intellect and ability above hers to be able to stand over her in the area where he feels the most confidence. Lex is the product of an abusive childhood. The Lex we know from the comics is what we can imagine his father to be, which would not have been an easy situation. After the beatings and being treated like treasure in public for monetary gain, but ignored and scorned, powerless in reality, Lex has turned bitter and psychotically developed in reaction to those defining life events. He wanted the adoration of his father and respected his business ability, modeling some of himself after him despite his hatred. But as he was alone in his torment, with no one coming to his aid, the darkness he sees the world to be, a world without divine aid that he thinks he has experienced, is the world he wants everyone else to see. His plot is all about perception. Power and goodness cannot coincide the way he sees things because of his past. Therefore, Superman's symbol of hope is to him a lie. He says they need to see you for the fraud you really are. He believes Superman to truly not be good because of the power he possesses. He wishes to disprove Superman to the world to validate his own worldview, to make the world see things the way he does. His entire scheme is built around forcing the world to experience the corrupt world he has lived in and perceive it the way he does. He needs the world to see their hero as a fallen man, with blood on his hands, because he believes the world has no heroes. Lex has manipulated Bruce to hatred by sending him messages that influenced his perception, specifically pinpointing things that cloud his judgment, things that he would perceive a specific way because of his defining life moment, the loss of his family, and that feeling of powerlessness. Lex mines that out of him, knowing he views everything through the lens of that event, and knowing Bruce has darkness inside of him. Lex has orchestrated a fight to the death, where if Superman wins, the world sees him the way Lex does. And if Batman wins, then man has conquered God, and night has conquered day, validating his twisted worldview. Unlike most superhero movies, the love interest is not in danger, but rather Clark's mother. This brings Clark to his knees. He is filled with so much rage, he is tempted to kill Lex, which would only lead to her death and validate Lex's assertions of his fallen nature. Lex holds in his hand no kryptonite, no weapon, yet he is in complete dominance. He has brought Superman into full submission with no way out, made the powerful powerless, and even mocks him, throwing the pictures of his mother on the ground before him as he grovels at Lex's feet. Clark will have to fight. Lex has been a puppet master and is staging his characters as he sees fit, based on what he wants the world to see. Lex even puts cameras in the Kryptonian ship for the purpose of the world seeing his show as he always intended. The media is still prominent in the film, even into this third act battle portion, as the Daily Planet has ceased work and stare at their televisions trying to figure out what is going on. Wonder Woman too sees the news, knowing there is a danger she could aid against. Superman says, "No one stays good in this world," a sentiment from the opening as well as a statement Bruce said earlier on justifying his fight with Superman. This is also a sentiment disproved in the ending, as good conquering evil is the ultimate battle of the film. The Batman-Superman fight finally arrives. Superman's demeanor has changed. He refers to Batman as Bruce, having discovered his real name at the party. Using this name shows an understanding of the manipulation, hurt, and humanity in Bruce, which he had previously ignored. From here on, the movie is from Batman and Superman's point of view, after a huge setup for these moments. Batman angrily insists he understands, but he doesn't. He uses intellect and tactics to defeat Superman through a multitude of planned traps and debilitating kryptonite weapons, all the while denying Clark's humanity in an intense, brutal fight. Batman, without knowledge of Superman's past and parentage, makes assumptions and spites him, letting out the rage built over his entire life from his loss and taking it out forcefully on Clark's body. He says the world only makes sense if you force it to, which is exactly what Lex has done. He's made the world bend to his view of it. As Bruce is about to murder Clark, Clark gives a desperate plea to save Martha, wishing her to live even if he perishes. This is the moment where illusions are shattered and Bruce realizes what he has become. He for the first time sees truth beyond his previous perspective. He is brought back to the moment that drove him to darkness and rage, but now in a different way. He has become akin to the murderer of his parents, not their protector. His very actions are leading to the death of his beloved mother, and the fear of him being responsible, which has plagued him throughout the film, would be true in this scenario. He has become the killer of innocence. Not only this, but Clark is now relatable to Bruce. The curtain of rage has fallen with clarity in its place. Clark is a person with very human qualities. His mother is dying just like Bruce's did. Clark is very much like himself, and his blinding hate and rage had clouded his judgment. He first stands taken aback. Then his rage and emotions build until it culminates and crashes, leaving him stumbling backwards, shocked at what he has become and what he had intended to do. He flings the spear aside, disgusted. Bruce now tries to right his wrongs. He goes to save Clark's mother, giving him power to redeem himself and save Martha in a way he was powerless to in his youth, as well as redeem the good in him by being her savior. Now the Bat is back in action. He thanks Alfred for sticking by him through everything, and Alfred guides him to Martha. Batman Arkham Asylum style beats his way through the goons in one of the movie's coolest action sequences, and succeeds in his task. Lex unleashes Doomsday to finish off Superman and prove his broken worldview true at any cost, because he cannot accept anything else. Once again, it is worth noting that news coverage is constant. A massive, extensive action sequence ensues as Superman battles Doomsday. Superman's monument is destroyed, representing the attempted destruction of what he represents, as well as the figure himself. Occasionally, we get an outside perspective from the military, as well as Superman's perspective in the action. Wonder Woman once again sees the news, now showcasing the terror of Doomsday, and she decides to join the fight alongside Superman and Batman. As the military go to nuke Superman and Doomsday, they point out Superman to be a person, a hero who could die in the blast. They take the risk. Doomsday grows more powerful, and we are left with a shot of Superman in space that resembles more Christ imagery. His arms are outstretched like a cross, and he has the appearance of death, only to keep fighting, a possible bit of foreshadowing. The three are on screen together for the first time, fighting in a huge action set piece. Within the fight, Zack Snyder once again pays homage to Dark Knight Returns. Superman's thematic arc hits its climax as he realizes truth and where he places value, what his life is for, and what his world is. His world is Lois. Personal relationships are what make life worthwhile, and to save the Earth, which previously mocked and scorned him, he lays down his life. Not only does this mirror Jesus sacrificing himself for the salvation of his people, but it also leads to a beacon of hope, ideals, and morals held dear from the times of Christ all the way to the present that Superman has represented and chosen to exemplify, knowing it's worth the sacrifice. This is once again a comic homage, as Doomsday is known for killing Superman in the Death of Superman comic. But the event is interrelated with the themes of the story, concluding Clark's arc, and supplementing Bruce's in a powerful way, and leaves the film on a tender, somber, and ultimately hopeful note. In the film's epilogue, newspapers are shown summing up the events of the third act, and newspapers are seen flying across the streets. The shops and workplaces are empty. The citizens have all gone to a funeral. The funeral of Superman. Or the funeral of Clark Kent, for the few that knew him as the person underneath and not the figure and symbol the world saw. For Clark, they have a body and a casket, but for Superman, they have a symbol. The people mourn their loss and respond with respect the best way they know how, in the way they knew him. The priest foreshadows that Superman in the future will rise up and once again live. Bruce has paid for the whole funeral procession. Man of Steel began and ended with birth, and Dawn of Justice begins and ends with death. I think it's safe to assume Rebirth will be a theme of Justice League, the conclusion of a trilogy's thematic arc in which Batman vs. Superman is the darker middle chapter. Batman at his lowest, most violent point, and Superman still maturing into the Superman we know and cherish. In the end, the dark film ends with a message of hope and a glimmering light for the future, with a monologue that mirrors the opening voiceover and gives a satisfying character arc for a changed Bruce Wayne. Yes, men are flawed, but they have the potential for good. They have the ability, against monumental loss, to rebuild and do incredible things for the good of the world. Unlike the darkness he sought light and solace in, the beautiful lie, there is truly light to be found in the world, even a world as dark and violent as this. A light that is genuine and powerful, even in the smallest kindnesses and sacrifices, and that is the message of Superman. The sentiment on his monument in the film really applies to real life as well as the film. If you want to see his monument, look around you. Superman was created in 1938, leading into the 1940s World War II era. People needed heroes to inspire them and that they could aspire to be. Superman exemplified truth, justice, the American way, and the moral spirit to do what was right. And even in this humanized portrayal, in his sacrifice, people were reminded of the power of sacrifice, kindness, and goodness. The spirit of that goodness lives on through the people that show it to others, and the ideals and values Superman had all the way back in the 40s are a reminder of what we strive to be and hold dear as people, values we cling to and know to be just, no matter how gray the world can be. So what does all that evidence point toward? Batman, Superman, and Lex all judge the world and its people based on their defining past experiences, and bend the world to fit into their perception, correct or not, until the illusions are shattered by actual personal experiences with one another, where they realize the humanity each of them has. Wonder Woman even has to confront her past experiences, which have shaped her vision, and believe the world is worth fighting for again, similar to Batman. The difference here being we are only seeing part of that journey, with the beginning released later on in the Wonder Woman film. The rest of the citizens uneducatedly judge from their limited experience and knowledge with the heroes based on what they are told by the media or what events they happen to witness. The past, present, and perception of the heroes and their loved ones that keep them grounded tie the story together and form an effective, driven narrative despite the multiple plot arcs the film juggles at once. All in all, this movie can be a lot to take in, but I believe the two main points concern the Batman arc of finding light in the world and the idea of being careful about how we perceive and judge things before we know all the facts, no matter what we've heard secondhand or seen in the media. This can apply to people you see on the street, or at work, or in school, or a movie, or a book, or anything. The phrase "don't judge a book by its cover" is really a relevant concept, considering the mob mentality the internet has displayed recently, where there are perceived correct answers on subjective topics, and the perceived majority, or the loudest voice, becomes the only voice on certain subjects. Batman vs. Superman has created an internet storm because in our social media-driven culture, everyone can loudly voice their opinion, and we are seeing in general a lack of ability to discuss, and people merely getting angry and becoming enemies over differences of opinion, especially when there is a strong sway to one side. Now, whether people are right to hate the movie, or it's a masterpiece, because both are opinions you are entitled to, it is rather ironic that the most divisive movie of the year, with all of this surrounding it, is actually about the topic of how things are perceived. Thinking for yourself before you judge, getting the facts before joining a mob, and remembering the humanity in people and seeing things from their perspective, because the way you perceive it without knowing everything or having a personal connection may not be entirely correct. And even if it is the way you perceive it and it's different than someone else, that doesn't mean either of you are wrong. Differences of opinion are beautiful things. I mean, there was a petition signed by thousands to get rid of Ben Affleck before the film was even released, and people ended up loving him. Ghostbusters riled up the world long before its release and had commenters everywhere at each other's throats. When you're online or anyone else, remember to see the humanity in things and that there's actually a person behind all of this. If you hear nothing else, then take that message to heart, because vile things are being said and we have the potential for so much more if we could discuss and think and treat each other with respect. While it's not the kind of superhero movie everyone was looking for, I personally thought the ultimate cut was an excellent experience. The dark side references and dreams don't have too much application until the bigger picture becomes clear with the Justice League film, and the pacing is still a little imbalanced, though greatly improved, but I love a lot about this movie, from the cinematography to the casting to the music to the story and themes. I liked that it forced me to think to the point that I had to share this video. I could be overthinking it, but that's my honest experience. A good friend of mine responded to all this with, "Cool, it has a deeper message." It still wasn't entertaining at all. And and that's fine too. Just be honest, and don't be afraid to have your own opinion, whatever it may be. And whether it's shared by most or none, you may be surprised by how many other people do share that opinion, and that we can respectfully disagree and discuss, which is part of what makes film great. If you liked the video, be sure to like the video, and for more videos in this vein, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and I will see you guys next time.